Hello, and welcome to Property Matters, a weekly look at all matters property designed to be of interest to anyone who has an interest in property. And Property Matters, as always, sponsored by Town and Country Property Auctions London and, of course, Fairview International Property Consultancy. Each week, we're looking at the big stories that affect the property world. And, of course, this last couple of weeks, we've been dealing with those top 20 tips to boost the value of your home. And today we're looking at the second set of 10, and we'll be doing those and sharing those with our special property expert, Joe Joshi, who's joining us, of course, now. Joe, welcome along as always.
Good morning.
Company on the Sunday morning.
Yeah. Well, I've got a few other visits to go and do after this, so I thought I'd better be suited and booted for the change.
Well, we're liking the upgrade in style, I have to say. It's very suiting for a Sunday morning. So, as we said, we've been talking about the 20 value-boosting tips to add real value to your home. And we were hoping to do all 20, if we were honest, in 1 hour last week. But, of course, that wasn't going to happen because we talked about them in some detail, hopefully provided a lot of interest and guidance for people looking to do these things to their home. So just to recap, if you didn't actually see these last week, the first 10 were dealing with structural issues, adding value with a new heating system, adding a garden office, doing the rewiring or the replumbing, updating your electrics, adding bifold doors, considering a loft conversion, investing in solar panels, which is Joe's favourite, of course, add value with home decorating, and making additional value with replacement windows, which is where we really start today. So, Joe, all of those, of course, really well worth doing to your home. And just a summary of that first section for us.
Yes, Paul. I mean, it was a really good subject to actually take out and do and discuss because, you know, a home is the best form of investment. It is the largest investment we will ever make in our lives. It's the ultimate goal that people want is to try and have their own home. So it's good to sort of recap on the type of things that are going to help them increase the value of their home in the years to come, and also to increase the comfort and enjoyment of their home as they go. So there were really good, valuable points, and we could always recap them. They can be obviously always viewed because these programs are recorded and kept on our YouTube channel. We're going to continue with the next 10 really, and try and give you a sort of a general idea of what is required.
And of course, we mentioned just a moment ago replacement windows, and of course, if we go back to the 1980s, that was the one thing everybody was doing. It wasn't it? UPVC was the king back then, but that's not necessarily what we have to have these days, is it?
No, I think you know, it's like anything, Paul. Change is inevitable, and we've gone through a lot of changes just in the last couple of years, let alone in the last 20 years, 30 years, that have made changes. But UPVC was all the rage, and the irony of it is, when I go back talking about UPVC and windows and doors and things, back in the earlier days when I started in this business, I used to be able to tell almost from the colours that people chose what you know, who lived behind those front doors, and what nationality and what, because you know, we have a way of you know, stating who we are, what we do, and where we come from. And I used to be able to literally pull up outside a house and say, oh, I know who would live in there. I know who lives in that road, who uses the blue color, who uses, you know, and those were the days when people used to paint their front doors, let alone the front doors, Paul. It was also the actual windows, and of course the house itself was also a huge thing. I mean, I still see sometimes when I go past, and I'm sure you have, and many others, occasionally you're right in the middle of nowhere and there is like a blue house or an orange or a yellow house that they've actually made a statement of sort of painting, and that was the way it used to be able to define and to show people, this is my home and this is where I come from. But of course UPVC came in and it was all white. Um, and so that kind of killed my guessing game of who actually lived there. But there were things that tweaked those things as well. For example, you used to have UPVC windows with leaded light, for argument's sake. So that was kind of posh. If somebody
Yeah.
had leaded light in there, they've obviously got a few extra shillings to spend. And if they'd had the Georgian style, which is the white strips in the middle of it, then that was like another grade. And then if you had just the plain windows, then that was completely a different grade. So people started to define their being, be it well or wealth being, through the types and styles of glass that was available to be inserted in the UPVC window. Um, of course, prior to that, we all had sash windows, which many never opened and many never could open because the ball on the side, the long tubes that were stuck within the framework had probably fallen off the rope, and so subsequently the window never opened, and so people kind of just nailed it together and left it. But yes, windows and doors are part of the facade, and very important, really, in terms of how it looks and what types of things people will actually go to the trouble of doing. And of course, that's changed now a lot and changed in different ways.
Yes, because I mean, it's worth saying that you can actually detract from the value of your home if you put cheap, nasty white windows in well, you wouldn't be allowed to put it in a listed property, obviously, but some kind of period property that was had some kind of quality about it. If you put the cheap, nasty windows in, you could actually lose value on the property, wouldn't you?
Yes, I think cheap and nasty probably is probably not the way. I think it's just distasteful. There are circumstances that, for example, if you've got a listed property or be it a grade one or grade two listed, obviously English Heritage has their few pences worth of input to say what they think should be and should look like. And it's quite interesting, even now, how many modern windows are made to look very similar to what was traditional. So you can actually buy modern double glazed or UPVC windows that were complete sash window lookalikes and open like sash windows, and provide the same thing. So yes, certainly on some properties there are restrictions. They call it has to be in sympathetic look to the current style. And the question always about these loose words like opinion and sympathetic, it's whose opinion and who sees it as a sympathetic. But fundamentally, that's true to say that it does make a huge difference. And of course, there's the other added side of it is actually the heating and the control and how much warmth you have in the house and how much energy you're burning. And of course, of late, those double glazed windows and or windows of that sort, we call it double glazed, but they're not necessarily double glazed. They might be just UPVC windows. But the point is that they affect your EPC, they affect the energies, they affect all of those things that actually now for the carbon emissions, and it just goes on and on. Sometimes I don't think it makes any sense because nobody ever looks at them, but obviously the government feels that it's another self-tax that's available to make money on, and so that's what they do. It's just that nobody really takes it seriously, but they do take seriously the presentation of their property, and those that do take that seriously obviously look at the kind of windows, the kind of doors and so forth. And of course doors have now become pretty trendy, Paul. Quite funky doors that you see, and people are being more daring, more creative in the types of doors that are available, the security part of it, and how secure those doors are. I always think if someone's going to get in, they're going to get in anyway. But the point is that we feel that we can make our home as secure as physically possible, and so those windows and doors are now quite a rage, actually, especially in the modern houses.
Yes, and looking at the next one, we're talking about remodeling, and remodeling is basically where we're talking about looking at the internal layout. These are from Home and Building and Renovating.com. Tips from Michael Holmes that we're discussing this week. If you're interested in looking at those, you can see them on the screen there. But that's an interesting one, isn't it, Joe? Because everybody wanted that open plan, clear layout, and everybody knocked out the interior walls and had that wonderful look through from the kitchen into the dining room so that the family could be together and there was a big space for the kids to play and mum could keep an eye on them and all that kind of thing. But now, of course, following the pandemic, the suggestion is that actually we're moving back the other way.
I blame Sarah Beeny for this style of thinking. To be honest with you, Paul, when Sarah Beeny started to do her programs on television to show people how she could create more space, she kind of took a sledgehammer to pretty much every wall that she could take out to create all this space. And it was a good idea, obviously, at the time, and people went with the flow. But what happened was when the pandemic came, it really brought it home that all the rooms, all the spaces that they're taken out were actually valuable, and they should probably reinstate them. And actually, when you think back and go back when the house was designed, they were probably designed with a lot of these things in mind. If you want to call it the breakout room. So there was a lounge, and there was a dining room, and there was maybe a separate kitchen. There was probably a small utility area and so forth. And then we came along with this idea of, like you say, when I look into from the kitchen for everybody sitting there eating. So you knock the kitchen into the dining room, and it became a big kitchen diner. And then you knocked the utility room out and stuck all the washing machine and the dishwasher and everything as part of the fittings within the kitchen. So then you have the whole noise of the washing machine and the dishwasher all running at the same time. Someone's trying to make the cooking, and then that became annoying and angry. And then, of course, now recently with the pandemic, you're trying to sit on there to maybe make a video call or do your Zoom call with somebody, and someone's got the pots and pans working in the background, and Freddie's running around and beating the car up, and the washing machine's running as well, and the dishwasher's going too. So all of that, and now everybody started to say, "Oh, I tell you what, I think we need to get to put another wall back in and restart." So yeah, we go through a fashion trend. But the practicality of it is that we do need the other rooms in the house so that you have that chance to go into that. If you think of it, the old days part, you go to the pub, Paul. The pub had a lounge bar and a saloon bar and a public bar. In the public bar, you had the dart players and the snooker table, and all the lads jivvying up, football game, etc., whatever goes on there. And then you had the posh end, was it the lounge? You had to be quiet and all posh and right. So even the bars used to have another breakout room. But we took it all out, in our homes, and decided to make it open plan. And now we're going back and putting all the walls back in because we don't need the noise. We'll be on our Zoom calls.
I suppose it's worth mentioning, obviously, this is something, that you really do need to talk to an expert about, because you can't just go knocking out walls. I know it's stating the obvious, but, some walls are structural, some walls are not. And you've got to be careful which ones you take out. It's not just what you want to make it look good.
Absolutely. And that's one of the points I made on last week, where somebody was talking about, we were talking about bifolding doors, and that's kind of a current trend. And I've recently seen where basically they've had a chap in to put the bifolding doors in, but they just didn't put the appropriate support where necessary. And then a few weeks down the road, the doors were not opening properly, which meant that there was movement in the property walls. So it actually started to sag, and before you know it, it creates a structural issue, and that structural issue can be very, very expensive. So do take caution and precaution to make sure you've got the right support mechanism put in wherever you take out walls. And of course, equally, wherever you put in walls, because even when you're putting in walls back in, they need to be supported well. Otherwise, they're just going to become loose and fall.
Yeah, it says here it's relatively straightforward and inexpensive to put in, but also do remember to add the acoustic insulation. That's the important thing with those stud walls.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, next one was adding the extra bedroom, which apparently will boost the value by as much as 15%. The number of bedrooms in a property has a big impact on the value, so adding bedrooms will usually add to the sale price. So they'll be aware that there is a ceiling value for every street, and so at some point the additional cost ceases to bring any return. That's a good point, isn't it?
Yes, look, every bedroom, that's the nature of what we live through. The starter homes, start with a studio apartment of some sort. Prior to that, maybe a share of a property with other people. So it might be a 4-bedroom house and 4 different people living in it. Then you progress to your own place, potentially maybe a studio. And then you sort of progress to a 1-bedroom, and each time you're moving up the line: 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 2-bedroom house, 3-bedroom house, terrace house, end of terrace house, semi-detached house, detached house, big detached house. All of those are going to add your progress in your own life, your progress in your family life, and of course, more than anything else, the value. The value of the property will go up, and it will make a lot of difference. Now, if you have the space and the land, and obviously the traditional semi-detached property always had a bit more space to the side, potentially because they used to have a garage there or a bigger garden. So people spend quite a bit of time adding extra rooms, and of course, every room that is added does add value to the property. The more recent constructions are always to the max. So if you're buying a detached property on a modern development, they've already actually maximized. They've probably already gone into the roof to provide the 4th bedroom, and they've probably gone into other areas to do other things. So it's a constant change that goes on. But as far as I'm concerned, I think every room that you can add in a planned way is the right way to deal with it.
Yeah, they make the point that you're probably likely to really be getting the easiest additional value by simply dividing up a large bedroom that's there already into 2 bedrooms, and that's obviously going to be really in an older period property, because obviously the bedrooms in the modern properties are going to be small in the first place, so unlikely to be able to divide those. But it's more likely to be where you can get the best return for that extra bedroom by dividing up a large room in a period property.
Yes, and they were nice sized rooms in period properties, and you could do that. But also, it's the installation and the layout of how you're getting to those rooms. I remember, and I'm sure you've come across some of these. I'm sure some of our viewers have come across these properties when you've had the sort of the 3rd bedroom used to come out of the 2nd bedroom upstairs, especially on a terrace property. And then eventually somebody used to put a little partition wall and create another corridor in order to get to that. But originally they were designed as either a nursery or just a spare guest room, or however it panned out for them in the best way. But today, majority of them are already come in with that full design, so there's very little room to make the changes.
Next one is kitchen makeovers, Joe, and this is an interesting one because it's not just the obvious one of ripping out the kitchen and putting in a new one. There is the thought that actually consider, is the space where the kitchen currently is within the property still the best place for it in terms of how you want the flow of the house to work, which is an interesting thought. Obviously, then you have got the replacement kitchen, but also there is that other more sort of basic upgrade, which is just simply changing door fronts and that kind of thing, and making things look a little bit fresher, just from a cosmetic point of view.
Kitchens are a big thing, Paul, and things are driven by the things that we watch, and nowadays pretty much every other program is related about cooking. It's either the Master Chef or some breakfast program, and all of those set their standards high in the types and styles and workable kitchens that we feel are the ones that you want to do. And I know you're a connoisseur of cooking yourself, and try the odd onion bhaji every so and so in order to try and get that. So people like yourself who are Master Chef proteges will look at their kitchen and go, things don't work for me in this way, and I need to make a flow of how that would work. So kitchen designing and planning is very much a personal thing of how it works, and one may not work for one of them, but it may work for somebody else. So big thing, and it's one of the biggest expenditures that you tend to do in a house, is the kitchen, because that kind of is the kitchen is probably where the heart of the house is. It's the crossroads of the house. It's where everything comes and goes, and it's also one of the places where I tend to, look for inspiration. When I look at the fridge, open it up, and think to myself, something's going to jump at me and say, "Eat me," but it never is the right thing. But it's an inspirational place in the home. So the kitchen is the heart of the home. It is the crossroad, and therefore a lot of people invest a lot of time and energy and money into making it as right and as possible. And wow, I mean, kitchens can start from as little as £3,000 or £4,000 to 50, 60, £100,000. I mean, you can. It's really an endless pit. The irony of it is, it all does the same thing, but it's just that we feel that we've got the latest posh kitchen with the. I remember, and you probably remember this, and it tells you my age. When Formica was the actual thing to have. If you didn't have a Formica top, you were not actually even in the running. That was the way it was done. And today it's marble, granite, and God knows whatever else that is. I mean, it's heavier than anything else you could think. But the heavier the stone you got in your kitchen, the better the value of your kitchen is going to be. And yet they actually do all the same thing. You're still going to use them as a surface, and chop your onions and veggies and so forth, Paul, as you would do. But it just makes little difference. But in our mind's eye, the posher it is, obviously feels that the posher the food is going to taste, I think. But we never get to see the kitchens that the chefs cook in, do we? In a restaurant, you're not going to get a tour of that kitchen. But when Paul is cooking at home, we get a whole display of that. So so the home kitchen is very, very important. It is where the heart is.
Well, if kitchens were relatively inexpensive to put in, potentially, bathrooms, I would suggest, are the other way around, having recently fitted a bathroom in. But it's an interesting topic area, because it is an area where, generally speaking, they're quite small rooms or smaller rooms. And so therefore, it is a good place that you can add a bit of luxury, a bit of wow factor for not a lot of cash. The suggestion is that the ratio should be one bathroom to every 3 bedrooms. And if your bathroom's downstairs, obviously you need to get it upstairs as quickly as possible. If you haven't got adequate light or natural light, then obviously putting in a roof light would be great. Try and paint it neutral, a light shade, and get that adequate light in there. And obviously important to think about the type of water system that you've got. If you've got mains pressure system, you're going to need a different type of shower than if you have an older place with a different setup. So quite an interesting topic area, and a lot to consider with bathrooms.
Yes, I can be a master on this particular subject for bathrooms, because at the moment we've ripped our bathroom out at home and getting a complete different version from every person that is coming in to suggest. And it's quite interesting, and the amount of discussions that end up at the in the lounge between the 3 ladies in my home. And of course myself, as to what is practical and what is right, and what they see is right as opposed to what I see is right. And I don't need half the things that they need, and so therefore I'm I'm not favoured. But yes, it's very, very interesting to see the different versions and the different varieties and the different tastes that go into the bathroom. It's funny, isn't it, really? I mean, you sort of don't really think of the bathroom as an important place, but sometimes it's the only place. It's your sanctuary, isn't it? You sort of sit there and you think, right, this is my little space, and no one's going to come here. But they never stop banging on the door and saying, someone's got to go to the loo. So 2 bathrooms minimum in the house is definitely a must, or definitely two WCs, watering closets, as they are known in the posh world, because that's what the WC stands for. The watering closet. It sounds very posh, doesn't it, when you say it that way? But it is a toilet at the end of the day. And you must have a couple of those, otherwise there's always going to be arguments who's in there and why in there for the period. But yeah, bathrooms, kitchens, cloakrooms, all of these areas are really the hub of the home. But the kitchen, without a shadow of a doubt, is a must. And now, of course, bathrooms. The biggest plus on these things are all the gadgetry bathrooms, Paul. So showers with steam coming out of them, and sprinklers in different directions, and it hits certain parts of your bodies because it's more therapeutic or whatever. They come up with everything and anything that is there. Not always particularly practical and not always powerful in the showers, as you rightly said earlier on. It's about the pressure. And if you've got the wrong pressure, it doesn't matter what gadgets you have, they're not actually going to give you the results. So it's very important to get all of that advice and guidance correct in the first place.
In terms of the sanitary ware, it's getting rid of the chip stuff, the badly stained stuff, the pink stuff, the green stuff, the chocolate brown colour, and going with a neutral colour. And as for flooring, I mean, it's all about keeping it clean and hygienic, isn't it? Vinyl or tiled floor, probably the best advice as far as that's concerned. And not forgetting the old ventilation. So if you need an extractor fan, plan to get one put in as well.
The biggest issue with extractor fans, Paul, and I accept all of the others, two things that I'll bring up there. One is wooden floors in the bathroom are probably definitely not a good idea. At some stage, that varnish on the floor is going to go. It's just going to look ropey in a very short space of time. It'll probably bow because the water's got in. So it might look aesthetically beautiful to the eyes at the time, but it really goes bad very quickly. It's the same as wooden cladding on the outside of a house. They put that up on the day that it goes up, it looks really good. You go back there a year and a half later and it's probably the worst thing you've ever done, because it's the weather, it's not good for the weather. It doesn't work well with the weather. The point I want to really make is the ventilation. The ventilation is so key. And historically, there were vents, air bricks and air vents that were always placed in certain parts of the house strategically. Problem is, most people find that little draft coming in is too cold. So 9 times out of 10, they've wallpapered over it, sellotaped it, put some polystyrene and glued it all on, and basically said, we don't want any ventilation. That is the cause of condensation. It is the cause of damp, and most bathrooms suffer with condensation because when you're having a shower or you're having a bath or whatever, you close those windows. You don't want the ventilation open. And back in the days, and still now, sometimes in the glass in the window, they'd have a little fan thing that was going. You put the ropes out and you could shut it and close it and so forth. Nobody ever wanted those. They were almost a requirement because that's what we had to do to tell building regulation that there was ventilation, but no one opens it because it's too cold. They are there for a reason. And it's very important to allow that. Even double glazing have what they call trickle vents. And I've seen and been around to properties where they've just, put tape over the trickle vent and don't want any bit of air coming in. And what people don't realize is that little bit of air that comes in is what helps circulate and keeps the bathroom, or any room for that matter, fresh and away from things like condensation and damp, which then become completely a new set of problems altogether. So they are there as a design for a purpose, and people should really take heed of the fact that they should leave some windows and doors or trickle vents open to allow the circulation of air, especially in the bathrooms.
The next one we won't spend too long on, because actually this is one of the ones that doesn't really add any value to your home, but it's important to increase its appeal and obviously its saleability as a result. And that's redesigning the garden, doing a garden makeover. So in terms of the of simple things that you can do to make the house more saleable, obviously clean up, tidy up the litter, take down the overgrown foliage, dead plants, weed it, repair and feed the lawn, cut back the overgrown trees and shrubs, as I say, create interesting shapes with the beds and the borders, keep them nice and tidy, and colour and interest with planting is always a good idea. But actually having a lot of money spent on having the garden redesigned is not going to add really a great deal of value to the property. So it's a tricky one, that one, isn't it? But it's going to increase the appeal of it for sale.
To tell you the truth, most people spend a fortune on their garden, and you're right, it doesn't really add value. It just adds therapeutic value, and so people do it because they find it therapeutic. They like to go into the garden and prune the roses and do all those bits and pieces. And many gardens are lovely, but and so much money is actually sometimes it's almost nicer to live in the garden than is in the house, because the house inside is probably the worst place under the sun, yet the garden has actually got the best of all. And that's just because people feel happier doing their garden. But you're absolutely right, it's not adding value. Where a garden is very important, in my mind, is at the front. The front garden and the front of the house must look presentable and presented. It is quite sad that a lot of some nice gardens are just ripped out and concrete is poured into the ground to provide space for a couple of cars. But that can also be done more tastefully, where you can create borders and have some flower beds and so forth. That would help the sale of the property and add value to the street and where other homes are. But you're right, the back is not there, but I can tell you a lot of people spend a lot of money on gardens.
A couple of things that they mentioned that are interesting. Privacy is something that really adds value, that feeling of seclusion. So it's really important to get the right height for fences and mature trees. You can raise boundary fences and walls to up to 2 meters without needing any planning permission. That's 0.6 meters on a highway. Structures within the garden, pergolas, can be up to 4 meters without needing planning, even if they go right up to the boundary. Create distinct working areas, distinctive areas for each function, such as seating, eating, storage, lawn, etc. Well-designed decking always adds value to the home, and so those are the basic things, really. So some good advice there.
Yes, I mean, every little bit that you're going to add is going to add value. Fundamentally, it is the most expensive that your money you're ever spending in your mind, and you must always continue to maintain it the best possible way to make sure that it is a good investment and it's a nice home and comfortable.
Next one is one that you've talked about many times on Property Matters, and that's exterior home makeovers. So we've talked about new windows, fresh coats of paint on the cladding or on the new front door or on the door, repointing brickwork, repainting doors and windows, replacing the old garage door, repairing windows if they're not needing to be replaced, repainting walls, repairing cracks and broken cladding, removing stone cladding even, adding a porch, climbing plants or trellis, adding a house sign and a number maybe, even renaming the property. All of these are easily done. But if you're doing radical exterior makeovers, you may need planning permission, of course.
Yes, it's a pet subject of mine, this one, primarily because I firmly believe that you don't get a second chance to paint a first impression. And that is what adds value greatly to the road that you live in, the street that you live in, the neighboring properties and your own properties. If everybody collectively worked well in a street to try and maintain their properties from the outside, irrespective of what goes in behind the front door, that road is the first impression. So imagine driving down, looking down Acacia Avenue, and if it's a nice tree-lined road and everybody's made an effort, you will actually say, this is a nice road. I wouldn't mind living in a road like this. and then you go past the same road, another one, Acacia Avenue, Acacia Road now, and it's got just rubbish and people haven't taken care of. Immediately they've decided they don't like it. And if they don't like the road, they don't like the house. It doesn't matter what you're going to put there. It's so important in my eyes that the front of the property must be well maintained and well presented, and gives you good return and good and actually makes you feel good when you go driving home. You drive home and you pull outside your house and it's clean. It just makes you feel 10 times better, because that's what you're working hard to do. So I can't endorse that high enough. Repointing windows, cladding, all of that stuff is very, very important. But above all of that, keeping it clean and clear is so important, and make sure that the neighbors also join that idea, and make sure that they also feel that that is the case. And I would stand up anywhere, anytime, and endorse that fact, anywhere. And if you look at the things that we do in our lives, we buy with our eyes, and we go anywhere. We would just turn around and decide. You go on a holiday and you go, "This is really nice. I like it. It's sunny." Everything we do is about what we like, and if it doesn't look right, it's just not going to be anything you're going to go with. So, this is my subject. I think that everybody should make a huge effort on the exterior of their property.
It does say that there's quite a lot you can do under permitted development rights, but you need to do your research and take advice on those things, obviously. Next one, conservatories. Do they add value? A well-built, high-quality conservatory or garden room will not only add a lovely space to enjoy the garden, but also add value to the home. It depends on whether you've got a flimsy, nasty, cheap-looking conservatory, or actually something that was reasonably well put together and well installed, and thereby goes the cost of a conservatory, which can be in the thousands, but into the tens of thousands, obviously, Joe.
A conservatory is probably the most cost-effective way of adding another room, and that's how it was back in the early days. Conservatories have now evolved in many different formats. Now, some are conservatories, some are orangeries, some are part permanent, some are semi-permanent. Of course, of late, they brought in new types of roofs that can go on conservatories that preserve and can conserve energy. But the answer to the question really is yes, it does add value. Yes, it does add the space, and sometimes it's the most cost-effective way to do both. But yes, do look at how they're put up. Now, they are put up. I mean, people will come in and say we can do this without. It's important to have the foundations right on a conservatory. Make that the solid base. Anything in life has got to have a good foundation. If it has no foundation, sooner or later it's going to start to crumble. And that's exactly what will happen with your conservatory. They creak, they move, they are plastic in their makings. And if they're not done correctly, they will become, and they'll start looking cheap very quickly. And of course, they're getting a lot of weather is hitting those. And we're sitting in there when it's and it can be the two extreme. When it's hot, it's too hot, and when it's cold, it's too cold. So to find that happy medium is making sure that it's correctly done and the appropriate heating's in there.
Next one on the list, number 17, adding value by getting planning permission or renewing leaseholds. Now, we have talked about this on Property Matters in the past. A property with a diminishing lease will begin to reduce in value, of course, once it gets under 60 years. Once the lease on the property gets below 30 years, it can be difficult to get a mortgage. If the landlord does not live on the premises, you may be able to buy the freehold or a share of the freehold and grant yourself a new lease, restoring the value of the equivalent to the equivalent of the freehold property. So this is an interesting one, and the point I think they're making here also is that by getting planning permission, so if you have a rural property, you get planning permission to keep horses on the land, or if you just want to build an extension or a larger than normal garden room, for example, or a home office that's higher than what's allowed, you get planning permission. You don't have to build it. The planning permission gives the value.
So yes, Paul, it's about getting the planning permission granted, because I think it's very important for the value of the property and the future buyers to know that if they are buying a property, that there is planning permission that has been granted. And that gives them a certainty and a surety of that if they are going to buy it and they want to expand and their family grows, or they need to add the extra room, they will immediately have that ability to do that. It's important to get that if you can, because it does take time. It's average, most councils taking anything between 8 and 12 weeks as a bare minimum to try and get that planning permission. Of course, the cost is to engage a planning consultant or an architect or a designer and get the appropriate application in that will meet the criteria of the CAM planning. That's money that you do spend up front, and it's probably actually quite easily rewarded in the value. And if you don't do it, the chances are that the next person that is going to buy it will probably do it, and therefore you may have missed out. So it's definitely a good idea where possible to get the planning. And if you can't implement it and you don't have the money, well, you can always renew planning. I think planning now, currently laws will last for 3 years, and then you'd have to sort of renew it. Or with that, it used to be about 5 years, but they brought it down to 3 years. And certain planning applications are then timeless if the work has started but not finished. So as long as it's been started and the local authorities knows that you've started the work, then potentially that can be done, that can be extended. But certainly in order to add value, if there's a possibility that we can add value by having an extra room, upstairs, downstairs, wherever, that would be very helpful.
Taking control of the freehold gives you the control of the ground rent, obviously, and service charges, plus management, repairs, and of those common areas. You've got to pay the landlord's legal costs to do that, obviously, as well as your own share. But the uplift on the value of the property by doing this is certainly worthwhile. Solicitor can help you with that, with the lease, of course, and the surveyor can work out how much it's going to cost you. It's pretty much the size of it.
Yes, I mean, owning the freehold of a block of flats is now becoming a little bit easier, though it's quite costly at the beginning, primarily because the government has made some changes and are encouraging people to do that. And landlords generally have to try and support in giving that if they're not maintaining it. Freehold landlords, they collect ground rent and maybe do something with service charges. They don't always do what they say they're going to do, and people are reluctant to do that. Any short lease, if you can afford to extend it, obviously do extend it, and it will help you add value. If not, the shorter the lease, the lower the value. So do bear that in mind. So all that effort that you put into owning a place, and then the lease becomes shorter, you're also shortening the odds of the value for your property. So very important. Any guidance and advice that's required on any of those things, of course, you can reach us obviously through Property Matters, and we'll be happy to help you guide that.
Number 18, how to add value to your house. Highlight the original features. So this is restoring old fireplaces, old beams, staircases, mouldings, all that kind of thing. Polystyrene ceiling tiles, getting rid of those, pine cladding, stone cladding, textured ceilings and walls, all that kind of thing. Those are the things that you can really add to the appeal. Do they actually add to the value?
It's all about the type of property, Paul, and it's all about where that property is, to be perfectly honest with you, and the practicality of that particular property. Those are very, very key and important issues to consider. If you've got a very nice thatched cottage, for argument's sake, in the middle of the country with an inglenook fireplace or an open fireplace, of course, it's part of the character, and you want to restore it to be able to give it that sort of wow factor and that feel, feeling home, comfortable environment that it does. The same situations, unfortunately, are not practical in towns now, because you could, you have a terraced house which used to have an open grate fireplace. Most people have taken those fireplaces out because it's added another, 3 by 1.5, 2 feet of space into the room. And so that has become more valuable than actually restoring an open grate fireplace. The only time that can't change is if it's a listed building or the fireplace is in an awkward design. And sometimes, I don't know if you've ever been there, but you see some properties have got fireplaces that have got sort of an angle at the bottom, which is this way, and then upstairs it goes the other way, and then in the roof it goes completely. So it's an impossible task to try and take it all out, and sometimes it's just best to leave it, because the structural issues in taking a fireplace out are equally important and need to be supported. Because in the early days, a lot of the properties were actually built around the fireplace. So your actual structure was the two chimney breasts, the solid structure. That was a thicker part of the house on the ends of the house. And then everything was built around it. So when you took the structure out of that out, all of a sudden you could have a collapsed house on your hands. So to make sure that the appropriate beams, steels, and so forth were put in are very important. But to restore them and to get them back to the glories doesn't always work with every property. So each individual property has its minuses and pluses.
Next one is creating a driveway, which we touched on earlier, actually. Creating 1 or 2 parking spaces in front or alongside a property can add significant value, even if it means sacrificing part of or even a little bit of the front garden, as you say, doing it in a more tasteful way, probably. For many buyers, a well-designed, low-maintenance drive is more valuable and appealing than the garden that they'll never use. You've obviously got to be careful if you face out onto an A or a B road with this, of course, but you will not usually need planning permission to create a new vehicular access onto your land.
No, you probably won't, but the cost becomes on the drop curb. So that land is not yours, that belongs to the council. And when you ask the council to come along and drop a curb for you, that's an expenditure that unfortunately they will charge you for. And that I've heard that varying from £1,500 to £10,000, depending where it is, in order to do that. But then if you have a nice house in the right location and you've got a nice car that you want to take off the main road onto your drive, then that amount is probably insignificant in the grand scheme. I don't have any issues with that. I think this is the modern world we live in. We have to have off-street parking of some sort. We want it outside our door for many reasons: safety of our children, safety of our own cars, and safety of our own well-being. However, they need to be done a little bit more tastefully. I find that sometimes, they've just taken the front wall down and put a couple of slabs down so that the car can get over that, and then the rest of it is a junkyard, and that doesn't really help the property at all. It might help you in the short term to say, I've actually created an off-street parking, but that off-street parking could be a lot more tasteful. So my advice would always be to do it nicely, because it will affect the sale and the value of your property.
Yeah, as you rightly say, check your right of way across any land that doesn't belong to you, and you can go to the HM Land Registry for a nominal cost and check that with them. Last one then, Joe, to wrap it up for our 2-week spectacular that we've done, the easy ways to update the interiors. By decluttering, adding a lick of paint or careful styling, it's possible, it says here, to add 5 to 10% to the value of the property. We're talking about things like wooden floors, repainting in the right shades, reopening the fireplaces, decluttering, upgrading light bulbs even, just cleaning the windows, sanding floorboards, creating storage, all that kind of thing, all potentially adding up to 10%. So quite an interesting one just for a little bit of housework.
So yeah, basic maintenance is very, very important. And sometimes you find that, let's say, an investor has had a property that's been rented out, and immediately after that tenant's gone, they need to go in there and freshen it up, as they say, lick of paint, and a freshness always makes a place look more inviting. And the hardest thing to do when you live in it is to take yourself out and ask yourself, what do I need to do it, and just can't be bothered, because you'd rather just go and lounge in front of the telly and not have to do it. But if you are thinking about selling your property, then of course it's good advice to take the general clutter out. I always find that the beginning of the house is the bit that really is beginning and the end are probably the bits that you really need to look at. And that is when if you've got a house that's on the market and you've decided to put it on, and you've got a porch or a hallway, an entrance hall that has got a lot of things, and every entrance hall has loads of things. It is the place that everything gets chucked in. The boots come off there, the jackets come off there. They're on the back of the door. You've got the winter, summer, and fall, and every other season coats at the back of it. The door doesn't particularly open much because there's so much stuff behind it and things like that. that's when a house is already small before you've actually stepped in. So
Mm.
if you're walking in and you find that the house is, you're having to sort of shuffle your way in, and you can't get 2 or 3 people into the same, they've already made that. Remember this: the buyer has already made this decision at that point that this house is too small. The first 10 seconds of entry through your front door will determine whether that buyer is going to buy. So the first 10 seconds, that house needs to be spacious, all that needs to be decluttered, everything needs to go upstairs, outside, into the loft, into the garage, wherever it needs to go, it's got to go from there. And the end route is also the same, and that's normally where the utility is, or you're leaving from the kitchen, going out to the garden, and that's the other end where we got the clutter. Because you've got these particular shoes that takes you out into the garden, and then you've got another set that you wear when you come back in, and before you know it, it becomes really tight. And then when they get out in the garden, they go have a sort of almost a sigh of relief and think, "Wow, just gone through that. Is it nice to have space out here?" So you don't want them to have that feeling. So I think the beginning and the end are very important. Of course, every bedroom, if you can declutter, is important because they want to see the size of the accommodation. But all of that little bit of titivating and tidying up and so forth definitely adds saleability. It may not always add the value, but then if the value has been put up high enough, then it's going to have the chance of a saleability of that property. So all very, very important things to do. And of course, remembering that this is our home that we're talking about. This is the most expensive amount of money that we spend. This is where we live. This is, everything. The whole world revolves around our house. And so therefore you must protect its value and how you look after it.
So there we are, Joe. That's our 20 ways to add value to your home. Hope you enjoyed the second set of 10 today. If you missed the first 10, you can go back on our YouTube or Facebook page and find last week's episode, which was dated the 17th of October. Go and find that and enjoy the first 10, and then you'll have no excuse but to go and get your property absolutely tip-top and ready for sale, if indeed that's what you want to do, or make the most of the value of it in general. Thank you, Joe, for your expertise as always. We'll be back next week at the same time for another Property Matters.